talk about habitat gardening tonight. And as Howie said, my name is Jim Howard. I work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, small agency within the United States Department of Agriculture. Is anybody here familiar with the NRCS? A few folks. So tonight we'll go about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and I'm just going to tell a story of my wife and I converting our American garden in Half Moon Bay into what it is now, which is a very thriving wildlife habitat garden. So we're on camera tonight, which means that I'll try to hold still and you guys have to behave yourselves. Don't, if you'd be so kind, don't challenge any of my assertions or statements. And then we'll go. But since there's only about 250, 300 people here tonight, we can probably take questions as we go. Let's not try to do too many so we can get through in about an hour, and we'll do questions and answers. But if you have a burning question, I like to address questions while the topic's on the screen. So here's the location of our garden. This is in Half Moon Bay. It's about about 1 mile north of downtown Half Moon Bay. So you can see the ocean here in the lower left-hand corner. Some state parks, state beaches along here, and then you see some residential areas in there, and then where that red dot is, that's where our house is. So we have ag fields on either side of our neighborhood. There's open space to the east of us, up in the hills. Kind of a typical coastside environment. And you know, the native habitat of this place before humans showed up was essentially coastal scrub, coastal terrace, coastal scrub. Our soil type is a coarse sandy loam, and we get about 20 inches of rain average per year. So this is the beginning. So let me go back. I'm standing in the picture's taken from the front of our house looking out towards the street. And that house across the street is a mirror image of our place. Small house, 960 square feet, small garden, about 1,700 square feet of garden. And this is what it looked like when we started back in October of 2005. So here are our goals. We wanted to have a much more interesting garden than what we inherited, than the typical garden that we become used to living in America. And so these are our basic goals when we started. Always get your stormwater right, get your drainage right before you do anything else. You know, that's a critical component. We had some drainage issues, water collecting around our foundation that we had to address right away. So that's the first thing we did. And we wanted to attract as much wildlife as possible to this small place within this residential area. And because we're both in the natural resources management business, in a new place, we wanted to learn the ecosystem that we were living in. We previously were in the Lake Tahoe Basin, working for the Forest Service. And like I said, we wanted to make it a more interesting space, and we wanted to do it cheaply and with a low carbon footprint as much as possible. So that's October 2005. Step one was to put a hedge in out in front. We figured if we were going to have a bird garden, birds is mostly what we're interested in, then we were going to have to kind of create a little sanctuary and separate ourselves from some of the activities on the street. So this is the beginning. First winter we started tearing up the lawn, tearing up a lot of the concrete, making it a more opening up our soil and allowing rainwater to soak into our property. And one of our goals was to try to maintain the rainwater on our property and not have it leaving our property. So we did some rain gardening, which I'll talk about a little bit in a while. So there's the first spring since we got started. So, if you would be so kind, would you remind me later to talk about that path when we get towards the end, or at the end of the conversation? We'll come back and talk about that path a little bit. So, quick note before we move on. This is a talk about native plants for habitat gardening. When we started, there were some plants on the property. So we inherited some plants, and some people gave us some plants, and we didn't have all native plants when we started. And it was a learning process. We had a long learning curve to get through, and we had rough goals, and we were going to try to get there. So when we started out, I'd say of all the plants on our property, probably 60%, maybe 70% were natives. And then as it evolved, with gardening, you're always changing plants out, plants die, you replace plants, you put new plants in, gophers get some of them. If you have deer, you're going to lose some of your plants and things change. Well, as we learned the value of native plants in the garden and watching the response of wildlife to what we put in our garden, we started getting rid of the non-natives. We were pretty much convinced that if you want native wildlife, native plants are what are going to attract them. And we could see that just observing the different behaviors of hummingbirds and other birds with non-native plants compared to natives. There's just no comparison. However, we are not purists. I work with a lot of people out on the coast side and sometimes over on this side of the Santa Cruz Mountains. And people have different values, So there are some non-native plants where you will see some value, structural value, and there can be some value. But I think you all, as you do native gardening, will realize that if you really want an interesting garden and you like watching wildlife, natives are the way to go. So this is 2.5 years into the project. This is about the time when we decided we're there, we're getting there, and let's take pictures and do a presentation. So the Native Plant Society asked me to address these native plants with common names for this presentation. So you're going to see common names on some of the plants as we go through.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a small house in Redwood City, and the soil's totally different. It's very heavy and clay-like, and over the 8 years I've lived in this house, a lot of things thrive and a lot of things die, and I think it's the soil. So, I like the yerba buena and the purple needlegrass, would those grow in a heavy clay soil?
So the question is, will these plants do well in heavy clayey soils as well as they would do in these coarse sandy loam soils? That is a very good question. Some of these plants would. Some probably would not. That's part of the learning process and why you want to work with somebody who has some knowledge as you select plants for your location, because you could go through a lot of frustration trying to grow something that just doesn't want to be there. But you can always amend your soil to some degree. If you have heavy soils, there are some benefits to that, in that you have, good nutrients, good cation exchange capacity in there, but the physical properties can be limiting. So if you add organics, sand and mulch and different types of organics to your soil, you can improve some of those internal drainage properties and whatnot, and get a wider suite of plants to grow there. Thank you for that question. That's a very important part of making decisions. So I'm just going to show a sequence here in the front yard through time, and then we'll move into the backyard and show some photo points, which of course you lose over time as the garden grows in. You can't get into some of those places. And then we'll talk about some of the wildlife that has come to the garden. So that's December 2009. Some of the larger shrubs are beginning to mature. And then that's April 2011. February 2012. So it's very interesting being on the coast as well. And most of you folks, I'm assuming you guys live over here on the peninsula. Well, you guys pretty much have the best climate on Earth over here. It's a little bit different on the coast, but very similar in that we have a very long growing season. And you can essentially, with the native plants that we have available to us in the Bay Area, and pretty much anywhere, you can have flowering plants throughout the year. This time of the year, August, September, is pretty much the downtime for my garden. It's not really a dormant period, but it's kind of a rest period because it's so dry. Question?
Did you install any drip or sprinkler systems, or do you just rely on the environment to provide the necessary water?
So the question was, did we install an irrigation system? No, we did not. And I do irrigate though. I hand irrigate, and I've come to very much appreciate that. It gets me out there and observing the plants, and just gives me the ability to do a little bit of weeding while you're out there, but to observe close up what's happening through time, through seasons and through time, which is just amazing. Some of the caterpillars you see, and some of the spider and the interrelationships of different things is just amazing. And I find that by actually having to be out there watering, that you get to see a lot of that. It also it makes you think a little bit more about the effectiveness of your irrigation. I actually pour water into a bucket and see how much water I'm getting in a 1 minute period, and then kind of convert that to, when I'm watering a plant, trying to water that root zone, how much water is going to the plant. And when I do irrigate these days, so it's been about 7, 8 years now, I don't really have to irrigate much. But like this year where we had no rain in January, February, and March, I got out there and did a heavy soaking at least once during that period to try to emulate a good wet spring and extend the bloom period. So now we're in the backyard, one end of the backyard looking towards the northwest. And you'll notice there's just a lot of concrete in this yard. Concrete, and even that lawn, which was probably had been there since 1971. Very little infiltration. Water would actually run over the surface of that lawn. And just very little wildlife activity at all. So one of our goals in trying to be environmentally conscious was to not have to run back and forth to the dump with all this concrete. This was a lot of concrete, and it was thick in some places. They had concrete to burn when they put some of this stuff in. So we had seen some ideas in Sunset Magazine and doing some of these garden tours around the Bay Area, how to use concrete, how to recycle concrete. So we built a raised bed there, lined that with gopher cloth, and also buried quite a bit of concrete underneath that. But as you can see, there are a lot of pieces there that are usable. And we spent just a couple, probably a day and a half or 2 days with one of those electric pavement breakers and broke a bunch of it up to where we could redistribute it and use those shapes for different things. And then underneath the concrete, we found lots of gravel, a lot of usable materials. And then, in breaking the stuff up, you ended up with a lot of unusable stuff that you could break down pretty easily with a sledgehammer. And then we had like cobble-sized stuff that we could use in some of the drainage features that I'll show you a little bit later. That's Meredith taking a little break. So, rain gardening. I'd never heard of rain gardening when we got started on this project. But we found out that we were doing it. And essentially it just means that you're collecting your stormwater on your property and trying to infiltrate it rather than have it run off onto your neighbor's property or into the storm drain or wherever. And so what we did, having a small property, we just had one big pit in the back and one in the front. And then all of our gutters and downspouts and everything, we dug trenches to drain into those low spots. And then you'll see later that we backfilled that with some material, planted over the top of it, and you just don't really see that it's there anymore. But very effective. We've never had, I've seen out in the front yard, you can see it actually fill up. But we've never seen it flowing off the property. Though we haven't really had really big storms over the last 8 years either. So that's July 2008. The whole project cost about $5,000. And mostly that's because we did the work ourselves. And didn't really buy that many materials. We bought plants, we bought soil amendment, mulch, some gravel, some of those stones there. But it was very inexpensive. That's April 2011. Some of our plants, some of the native plants. That Brandegee's sage, Salvia brandigii, that's a native of the Channel Islands, Southern California. That thing is an amazing plant. It's 8 years old now, and it just thrives.
Jim?
Yes.
It makes an excellent hedge even for the street in San Francisco, is where I have it.
Nice.
And I mean, it'll fight back there, it'll fight back almost anywhere.
So Roz commented that the Brandegee's sage makes an excellent hedge. And one thing that's amazing about sages is their structural habitat. Not only do they have amazing blooms, and they bloom probably 9 months out of the year, they're blooming in this climate. They provide a lot of habitat for birds. You see a lot of birds flying in there, and it's a very safe habitat for them. Hopping around in there, eating bugs, and a lot of bees. Hummingbirds like it a lot. Sage is one of the plants, when I work with farmers and ranchers and private landowners on the coast side who put in hedgerows or other types of native plantings, I'll almost always recommend sages, native sages. They're just tough, quickly established, high productivity wildlife plant. So this is this morning. I took this picture this morning. And like I said, this is about as quiet as it gets in the garden. You can see that coffee berry back there has just gone berserk this year. I didn't put a lot of time into my garden this year. It was a little busy. But I've turned that garden into a part-time annual propagation area. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So here's in the other side of the backyard, looking towards the southeast in the beginning. But a lot of wood there too, you know, the old, that deck and hot tub area, and we had a bunch of old fences that we pulled down. We were able to use a lot of that old wood too for different things. So here, this was our design for subsurface drainage. And what we did is we, essentially eyeballed the elevation from the foundation where the gutter, the downspouts came out, dug a big hole back in the corner, and then just trenched back towards the different areas of the yard and gave it a little bit of slope. And then we backfilled that with that cobble-sized rubble that we had, capped that with some of the gravel on top, and then in some places we put weed mat over that. We'll look at that a little bit. So let's talk about weed mat. Weed mat has been an interesting learning experience for me. It's not a good thing if you like wildlife. If you like insects, insects need to access the ground, in and out of the ground. And the soil needs to breathe and have access to the atmosphere to be healthy. So we knew this, but we wanted to try it anyway. We wanted to experiment. We wanted to be able to give informed information to people who ask about it. So we did part of the yard in weed mat. And what I'll say after 8 years is that it does have its place. I don't like it where my plants are, where I want insects that live, with the plants and need to get into the soil. I've removed a lot of it. But underneath a path, where you've put a path or some kind of infrastructure where you don't necessarily want plants growing, it's actually fairly effective. But always know that if, insects really drive the ecosystem, and they have to have access to the soil. Native bees, everything really needs to get into the soil. So keep that in mind.
Harvard is famous for saying, no bugs, no birds.
Yes, that's a good point. So there's July 2008. So this photo here, I like this photo because this was the time when I first felt like the yard was starting to look like we wanted it to look. You know, it's got a lot of diversity, it's kind of wild. You know, birds are starting to nest in some of the shrubs. We had some white-crowned sparrows nesting in the, there's a baccharis back there, a coyote bush, and an ocean spray. We had white-crowned sparrows nesting in there. Really starting to like the way it's looking. And then this is this morning. You see that hummingbird up there in the? Yeah, he was or she was just like, "Hey, dude, get out of the bird bath area." A lot of bird activity in this yard. You're always, when you're inside the house, you're always looking out the windows, and there's always something going on. That Dudleya is one of my favorite plants too. Does anybody have Dudleya in their yard? It's an amazing plant. No water, doesn't need any water ever. And it puts out just the most amazing, beautiful blooms, which last like 7 months. And hummingbirds, that is in high demand with hummingbirds.
What is blue blossom in August? Is it blooming right now?
It's not, actually.
Okay.
Blue blossom is Ceanothus thursiflorus. That's our.
So is the purple a purple foliage thing? Is that
That's in the neighbor's yard,
Okay.
and that's a fruit tree
Okay.
of some sort.
So-
Just a quick comment on the blue blossom. That Ceanothus thursiflorus is our original native Ceanothus before the Europeans came and discovered the beautiful blue blooms on the California coast, took them back to Europe and hybridized them, and now we have lots and lots of them. So this is just kind of a shot of the, this is kind of the high impact bird area. My wife Meredith, as we were going through this, towards the beginning, she says, I want to get some water features in the garden. And so she started out by just putting some of these, you know, shallow basins out there. And immediately birds were just so many more birds. And we kind of learned through the process that putting sand in there is really important too. Birds, you know, native wildlife are particular about their habitat. And originally we had, those things were empty, and you could see birds just not comfortable. It's weird. You know, robins would get used to it and they'd get in there, but a lot of the birds were just not, they didn't like it. We put gravel in there, pea gravel for a while, and that was a little bit better. And then Meredith just started putting play sand in there, and that seems to be the way to go.
To place it in water, what on top?
It's the it's on the bottom of the tray.
And water,
Yeah, and then you just fill it with water. Roz and I were talking a little bit earlier about bird water, and you know, it's as simple as that. If you want to start out simple, you don't want to build a fountain and put in a pump and things like that, just try putting some trays out there with water and a little bit of sand in them, and refill them every day or every couple of days, depending on how much bird activity you get or how hot it is, and you'll be amazed. And the more you have around the garden, the more birds you'll get, and other things too. You'll get butterflies. Butterflies like wet sand, bees, raccoons. You may not like raccoons. I love raccoons. They're a good pest control tool.
Isn't it hard to clean with the sand in it?
You know, they last quite a while. If you just kind of blast them out, you know, kind of stir up the water, tip them out, fill them back up, you can get by for quite a long time, a month or two, before you switch it out, scrub it a little bit, put new sand in there. And birds, they don't need perfectly clear, crystal clear water. You don't want them to have horrible water, but they can deal with kind of dirty water. So this is kind of our little shady area underneath the elderberry. Hummingbird sage is another plant that I recommend to everybody, pretty much everywhere. It's adaptable to different environments. It's high output of nectar. Hummingbirds just love it. It's beautiful. It creates a nice, pretty nice, thick ground cover that you don't have to weed very much after a while. Seat monkey flower, Mimulus guttatus. That's that's a wetland plant, water-loving plant.
Jim,
Yes.
how much water do you actually provide to seed monkey flowers manually?
I'll hit it during the flowering period, spring, early summer. I'll overspray when I'm filling the fountain and hit it with some extra water.
How often do you do that?
Fill the bird bath.
Yeah, or, I mean, always spray, yeah. What are the monkey flowers?
I'd say a couple times a week. And it's all, I really like to just extend the bloom period. It's pretty inexpensive and low maintenance to do that. But the value, a little bit of extra water, the value of extending your bloom period for wildlife is really huge. So there's the other 2/3 of the team doing, that's our monitoring program. I'll show you a list of the birds that we've seen in our garden. So now we'll look at some birds. Now I know we have some avid birders in the audience tonight, so we won't do name that bird. These are bush tits, tiny little birds, and they fly around in flocks of 5 or 10. They're just great birds, eat a lot of bugs. They live in the coastal scrub. Chaparral is their native habitat. Cute little birds.
Is that a rock with water flowing over it?
Yeah, that's just a flat rock sitting on top of a column with a hole in it.
Oh, and it just seeps out and down.
Yeah, and that has turned out to be, Meredith designed this thing from some parts and pieces. It's a 10-gallon basalt basin from a broken fountain. And it has a grate on top. So it's just 10 gallons of water underneath that grate. And then we have those couple of trays up on top of that, some gravel. And then above that is where the water comes out and kind of bubbles up about that high and spills over that.
Is it recycled?
Yeah. Yeah, it just goes round and round. And we have to fill that thing up, depending on what time of year it is, a couple times a week, probably.
Oh, that much evaporation.
Well, the birds
Yes.
kick a lot of it out, too. The other thing about bird water that's important is diversity of bird water is really valuable. Different birds like different kind of water, shallow, deep, flowing, dripping. You'll see different species of birds using water differently. These are California towhees, one of my favorite birds. We have a resident pair now that are just there all the time. First birds in the morning every day are the hummingbirds and the towhees. Out there using the water and feeding. Anybody know this bird? Yeah, Yeah, that's Townsend's warbler. You guys have lots of those over here. Don't pay any attention to that ivy.
It's native.
You have to, you got to get along with your neighbors, and so there are always compromises that have to be made. That's a Buick's wren, another avid bug eater. You'll see Buick's wrens collecting spider webs around the property and eating bugs out of spider webs. This is a yellow-rumped warbler. Ground cover is also an important thing for birds. You see birds using different types of surfaces a lot. Birds like some bare ground, they like bare dirt. You'll see birds bathing in dirt sometimes. Native bees like bare patches of dirt and sand that they can burrow in and out of. But also mulch, native organic matter on top of your soil is important too. Bees can go up in and out through mulch as well. You don't, there's talk about not putting your mulch on too thick and too heavy because you might be inhibiting insects from getting in and out of there. But I have seen bees come down and crawl through mulch and go in and out of the soil. Question?
Yeah, I noticed this bird is on the ground, and on a previous slide, there was a cat in it. I have a cat. The best hunter I've ever seen. I have open concrete, no place for the birds to hide, and he's deadly. And so is that just an impossible situation? I'm going to have to choose between cat or tracking birds because it's not going to work well.
Not an impossible situation, but certainly something that you're always going to be wrangling with your conscience over.
Right, that bird would be dead in 3 seconds.
Well, my cat will lay 3 feet away from that bird and not really pay it much attention. My cat's old and fat, lazy. But, other cats come to our yard too. Our yard is an attractant for the neighborhood cat.
Yeah, sure.
So,
It's got a lot of food there.
yeah, and just a nice place to hang out. We sleep there a lot. So, but I've seen people do some very creative things, having cats and having birds. You can have an outdoor area that keeps cats in. Yeah, I've seen screened areas, kind of like aviaries, where cats can go outside, but they don't get in outside of that. I think it was Sunset Magazine several years ago where this one woman in the East Bay, I believe, had built some gopher wire tunnels through her garden. And the cat could go through the cat door into this network of tunnels and be outside. So
is it
yes.
possible to track so many birds that the one cat just gets full?
That's the other thing too.
That's a natural solution.
I think about this quite a bit because, you can't live in this world without being a hypocrite. And you got to manage your hypocrisy. And one of the things that I've thought about is that, in the human environment that we live in, we're disturbing, we're creating an unusual environment. And that has effects on how wildlife has to deal with it. So, on the other hand, if we manage our properties responsibly, we can have a huge impact on those wildlife species that are struggling out there. I've learned in a short period of time the benefits, the good that you can do on your little place that you can control is huge. So there's going to be some trade-offs. There are going to be, domestic animals that prey on birds, but birds are going to have to deal with that. And you can help by trying to create a habitat that gives them the ability to better deal with that. Cats aren't the only problem.
I think that's a great answer, and I totally agree, but I would just really briefly say that it is an ongoing learning experience. I mean, I think back to when I first started doing habitat gardening, and I didn't know that much about praying mantises, and I had introduced one of those mantis pods, and they hatched. You know, it was supposed to be for pest control. And praying mantises are hummingbird predators, which I didn't know. And one of them was on the feeder, and I thought, why is it doing that? And it was a battle between the hummingbird and the mantis, and I intervened. Because I thought, well, I brought this into the yard, and I'm trying to support bird life. But anyway, it can get very complicated is all I'm trying to say.
It is very complicated. It's wonderfully complicated.
Yeah.
The more that you pay attention, the more you realize just how unbelievably complicated that it is.
But I suppose if that's the worst damage you're going to do when you think of all the larger damage that we do all the time, yeah, you have to kind of keep perspective.
Yeah. Pine siskins. These birds aren't real common on the coast side, but we get them every year. One time Meredith and I were sitting out in the back patio having cocktails with some friends, and one of these guys came in just exhausted and looking rough, and pretty much just ignored that we were sitting a couple feet away, landed on the bird bath and just sat there for several minutes, just catching its breath, and watered up a little bit, and looked like it had just come in from a migration maybe. But interesting, look at that bird drinking water as it flows off the edge of the rock.
Do you do any supplemental feeding for the birds, or is it all plants?
No feeder.
Okay.
We don't do any
So you
feeder.
have lots of berries on your plants for birds. And
Lots of insects, lots of seeds, yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting. A lot of folks do have feeders, and it's, you know, it comes with its own set of challenges and benefits and, you know, downsides. We don't like feeders. We just don't like, we have friends with feeders, and I just don't, the whole political scene out there with the feeders just doesn't seem natural to me.
Question?
But, no offense if you have a feeder, it's okay.
Is it possible, we have some oak trees on our property, and in particular in the backyard, there's a nice area, backyard area goes up, and there's an oak tree. Is it possible to plant some species around the outskirts of an oak tree that will be attractive to birds?
Yes, yes. That we have some amazing species, oak understory species that are available to you. This is one of them right here, hummingbird sage. Its native habitat is oak woodland, oak understory, maybe out on the perimeter where it can get some sun part of the day. Yeah, there are a lot of plants that will be happy in that environment. And go to a native plant nursery, or you know, they have books, or you could go online. Las Pilitas website has, they describe different plant communities in different microclimates.
Oh, what was that last?
Las Pilitas. In fact, I give it a reference at the end with a website address. Yeah, so that's an Anna's hummingbird. And when you see them getting nectar out of a hummingbird sage, there's a lot of nectar in there because they park in there and they're there for a long time. Smells really good too, that plant. There's a robin. going from the strawberry beds to the bath. You can see the tip of its beak is stained from poking the strawberries. There's a robin fledgling. Very interesting to see recently fledged birds in your yard, you know, hiding under the dappled shade of a lupin, being safe, you know, while they're kind of immobile and just learning how to be out of the nest. So that's wild strawberry. That's a robin in there. I see a lot of goldfinches eating wild strawberries. Really good food source. Excellent ground cover as well. Anybody know that bird? Yeah, that was quick. It's a ruby-crowned kinglet. It's always a rare treat to be able to actually see the ruby crown. Allen's hummingbird. Resident comes and has a nest every year, or some generation of them. That is a hermit thrush. Yes, that's a dark star ceanothus. Every year, a different bloom on that plant. Every year, it's a different sequence. This year was weird. It had about 4 or 5 blooms that weren't really intense, but pretty good, you know, and they would just start to fade out and another one would come on. It was an interesting year for climate. Orange-crowned warbler on a hot day. Black phoebe, that's one of the flycatchers. That's an Anna's hummingbird. Wavy leaf soaproot plant. Anybody familiar with this plant? It's an amazing plant. Amazing plant.
That's not the soap plant, it's soap root.
It is, yeah. Yeah. That's the thing about common names is you never really know what somebody's talking about.
What is that gray thing in the bottom there? The bottom, the right bottom corner?
That's his
That's his tail.
No.
Hummingbird's tail?
No, I want, but what the hummingbird is sitting on, what is that?
Oh, it's flying actually.
Okay.
Yeah. She's flying in there and getting some nectar. So this is a female orange-crowned warbler that smacked into our sliding glass door. And she was okay. She made it. That's one thing you really want to watch out with cats. There's a lot of urban kill with birds hitting windows. And there's things you can do with your windows, you know. I've seen all kinds of different things, but you do want to try to have some kind of an indicator that this is not a passageway. And when a bird does hit your window, just leave it alone. Keep cats away from it, but just leave it alone. Sometimes you'll just be sure they're dead, and they'll snap out of it. Hopefully.
What should you do to your windows to prevent that?
We have those windows with the, there's squares of vinyl things in them, but some of our doors don't have those. I've seen people hang one CD from a string. It just kind of twirls around on the outside of the window. Anybody else know any tricks?
The Audubon Society have a silhouette of a hawk, but it's almost transparent to us, so you can look through your window. But it's either ultraviolet or something that birds see that we don't. So as the bird comes toward the window, he sees this silhouette, very sharply. And I've seen them. They'll come and then they fly off. And I've got them on all my windows because I have windows both sides of the house. So the birds think they can fly right
It's
through.
usually a Mylar thing, they just put on the window, they sell sticks. It's only about, not very big. Sometimes that Burns Garden in San Carlos might have you sell in there.
That's a good point. The Birders Garden, San Carlos, right on El Camino Real.
They have these things that I got from Audubon. So they're black ones, and they're just plastic, and you wet them and stick them on the outside of the window, so. you take them
So
off.
do you think that the bird only sees that when it's really close to the window? Because I
The
wonder,
black one, I'm not sure about, but the other one, I think as the light catches it, knows the bird's coming. Even
That's-
peripherally, he sees it, and then he knows there's something there.
that's interesting. So this is a sharp-shinned hawk, one of the masters of residential hunting. Really, really cool to see these guys hunt.
No, for the bird catches.
Actually, I've seen one take a bath in our bird bath, and the other birds are still around because they know the safe distance, but they're just kind of all in the same backyard. the same-
Wow, wow.
He catches birds in flight.
It was a different hawk.
Yeah.
And this is a Cooper's hawk, very similar to a sharp-shinned hawk, a little bit larger. This is a cool story. It was Saturday morning. I was up and went to the kitchen sink, was looking out the window and see some movement. And this guy's up on top of the fence between us and the neighbor's house, underneath this New Zealand Christmas tree. It's the biggest tree in the front yard. And he's got a Eurasian collared dove. And he's got it pinned down by its neck. And a Eurasian collared dove is an exotic invasive species. So I was really happy to see something hunted because their numbers are really growing, and there's a lot of fear that they're shoving out like the mourning dove, and I really think it's happening, and the numbers are just really exploding. So anyway, he's sitting up on top of the fence, and that has just happened because that dove was still alive. So I ran and grabbed my binoculars and was watching him, and he was trying to decide which side of the fence to take it down to the ground and eat it on. Came over to our side. So I went and woke Meredith up. We got our binoculars and watched this guy. And I made the mistake of, I didn't know my flash was on the camera, and I flashed, and he was like, so he moved back behind some bushes, but we were able to watch him, and he was there for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, and he ate this thing down. And then another cat came into the yard, and so it just grabbed what was left and took off with it. It's amazing, though. You can see the red eye on that. A lot of adult raptors have red eyes. Beautiful bird, though. Giant buckwheat is another Channel Islands plant, or probably Channel Islands and Southern California mainland. So this is a hooded oriole. Very interesting bird. When one of these flies by, there's no mistake. You know, there's nothing like it around here. And this is a bird that, it's an interesting story. I'll kind of go through the story of how they came to be semi-native to our area. This is the female. So every year we have a pair of these things, and this species only nests in a fan palm. I'll show you a picture of a fan palm. That's the only thing they'll nest in. We have one in the neighbor's yard behind us. And so every year in April, late March, April, the male will show up. And you know it, the first day he's there, you can hear him out there calling. And he's running around for a few weeks or maybe a month before the female shows up. Eventually the female shows up. And it was a couple of years before we ever could locate their nest. But they have a very cool, very specific type of nest. So that's a first-year offspring. So that's a fan palm up in the upper left corner there. And they nest right up in the first brown fronds below the green stuff. And like I said, even with binoculars, we never really located their nest. A couple of years in, we finally found one. And there it is. Can you guys see that? So they build this nest on the bottom side of these fan fronds, and it's like a hammock with an access hole up here, and the eggs and the chicks are down in the bottom of this thing, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, for predators to get at that stuff. But they're busy birds, busy fighting off house sparrows and other cowbirds and starlings and stuff constantly during nesting season.
How long, how many years does the nest last?
It's just a one-shot deal, I think. Because the tree as it year to year, those fronds kind of hang down. So it's just that first year that those new brown fronds, they seem to go for that. And the nest seems to be built out of that material as well. So the story I was going to tell you, because they're so host specific to that plant, it was that plant being moved from Mexico and Southern California up here by the missionaries, up into the San Francisco area that actually brought the bird with them. So there's lots of lessons when you're out there gardening. This is one that I learned, don't prune in the spring. I almost cut this thing down. That ivy on the neighbor's fence is always encroaching on our little pathway on that side of the house. And I was very close to cutting this thing down. Popped my head over and a couple of little Allen's hummingbird eggs. That hole is, about the size of a quarter or a $50. And they build their nest out of spider webs and things that are stretchy, so the nest can expand as the. This is a nice young clean nest, Once they start, I've seen this hummingbird flying around on the fence and picking lichen off of the fence, and then I see the lichen showing up on the nest. There's little chicks. Nest is starting to get kind of nasty. And then this is their first day on the bath. That's mama in the middle, and those are the two chicks trying to figure out what's going on. It's pretty funny. You can really tell when you've got a young bird in the yard. They're just, they're not very good at anything. Hot day on the coast. Got house finch, American goldfinch. There's a little bush tit in there. And in this same picture, there was also, I had a California towhee and Anna's hummingbird, but I cropped it down. So this is our list of birds before and after the project. You know, when we first moved in and started working in the yard, there were a lot of birds flying into the neighbors' trees. They have a big mess of roses and bottle brush and this New Zealand Christmas tree and a butterfly plant. Very nice cover for birds, good structure, nesting habitat. But they just didn't, they weren't interested in our yard at all. We were able to bring that stuff into our yard. I recently actually saw a downy woodpecker stop by briefly. Never saw him again. So, 42 species without a feeder.
I assume your maintenance is pretty low, because don't you want things to go to seed?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, actually. It is low maintenance, and it's kind of however much maintenance you want to do, really. But it is important to leave dead flower stalks and leave, you know, things, let things get a little thatchy sometimes, and observe what's going on, because, you know, insects, you can support a lot of insects in different stages of their life cycle by, you know, letting things be kind of wild. It's amazing how things use different things. The little hairs on a plant, or, you know, it's fascinating. But some people like to deadhead their plants so they get more blooms. You know, that's okay. It's just, you got to kind of figure it out on your own. So some of our other wildlife. This is a syrphid fly. Really good beneficial insect. Eats a lot of aphids. These are the ones that hover. There's different sizes of them. Kind of mimic a bee. That's the giant buckwheat. Are you guys, are folks kind of familiar with native bees? Native bees, I find that, you know, most of us aren't really dialed into that world, but there are so many native bees. There are 500 species or more just in California. All different sizes. Little things that we think are gnats, some of those are native wasps. And they're very, very important for the ecosystem. Good pollinators. They're much more effective pollinators than European honeybees. They play a very important role in the ecosystem.
What was that insect?
Let's see, I don't remember.
Some sort of fly.
Yeah, that's a fly.
Oh, that's a fly.
Fly, yeah. I don't know what kind of fly, but flies are pollinators too. You know, I see flies pollinating my strawberries quite a bit. You saw those purple flowering lime thyme, that ground cover plant that was around the raised beds. A lot of flies and bees on that. And those flies, you'll see them on the strawberry flowers too. It's another syrphid fly. This is another one of the Ceanothus. So you see this a lot too. These are native bees. You know, native bees, so they're not colony animals. Bumblebees might live in small colonies of 5 or 10 maybe, but they don't do what European honeybees do. They're very nomadic and singular. And they build their, you know, whatever they do, whether they go in the ground or they dig in wood or whatever, and they lay their eggs in there and they die off. And then those bees, when they hatch, they go out and they live for a season and then they die. And so at nighttime, they just go sleep somewhere. They just rest somewhere. So you see this, you go out in the morning and you see these bees just, you know, covered in dew, waiting for things to warm up. And these guys are working early, you know. They're harder workers than honeybees. Be careful with morning glory. Very aggressive vine. It's one of our native plants. But be careful with it. It'll take over. That's a skipper on a Grindelia gum plant. Pumpkin spiders. You guys get pumpkin spiders over here? Yeah? Cool animal. Very nondescript little spider. You don't really notice it until about this time of year, September. They become these huge things. They grab leaves and wrap them into this canopy thing and glue it all together. This is a coffee berry. Tiger swallowtail butterfly. Hanging out on the giant buckwheat. We got lots of salamanders. Just another comment on, simple, inexpensive bird water features. We bought a nest box at the Birder's Garden. And these are really cool because the box is essentially a bluebird box with an 1.125" hole, which is bluebird size hole. And then you can buy these little plates that are different size holes. So you can have a plate for nuthatches and wrens, or you can have a plate that's the size for chickadees and, whatever.
One thing, those plates, a lot of times you have woodpeckers trying to peck through into it. And the plates should be hardwood or metal.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, good point. There are lots of woodpeckers and flickers and things like that. They try to get in, or they maybe want to make it their home, so they try to blow things out. So these metal plates are just very, very smart idea.
Are there any bat houses?
We don't have any bat houses. We had a bat house once. We lived in Trinity County and bought a bat house and owned it for years and never got any bats to move into it. It's a difficult thing to do. You can do it, but you got to be very patient. And we tended to move a lot, and we never figured out how to make them move in there.
You need water. You have a water feature where you're at?
Probably not back then. Thank you for bringing bats up, though. Bats are one of my favorite creatures. Very important part of the ecosystem. So we haven't talked about sticky monkey flower yet. That's one of our native plants of coastal scrub chaparral. Mock orange. I noticed mock orange is not on that plant list. Here's the Buick's wren checking out the house. Okay, so I wanted to, I know my perennials pretty good. I know my shrubs and subshrubs pretty well. But when I'm out in the field, I just don't know my annuals so good. So I wanted to start getting some annuals going in the garden. But I've been frustrated for years trying to plant things with seeds. Especially in this environment where you have so much weed pressure, you just don't know what's coming. You got 50 different things coming up, and what's what. So I decided to do a little cultivation and plant some native wildflower seeds where I could know what I was getting, weed them, and grow them, and then transplant them around the yard. It was very effective. So I put a little bird netting over it, put some flagging on there so the birds could see that there was some netting there. And this was a very effective way to get wildflowers in the garden. Now I have, especially this globigilia down on the bottom. I got that stuff all over the garden. Those are two different species of Gilia. Gilia tricolor and Gilia capitata. Gilia capitata. Bird's eyes. That's the globe Gilia. Just a quick comment on necessities. You know, we don't have a lot of space, and when you do gardening, you've always got materials. You know, you've got dirt, rocks. We've got our compost system and some green waste. That's the plant list that you all have a copy of. I want to give a plug to Actera Native Plant Nursery, which is very close to you guys. Anybody familiar with Actera?
I've heard about it.
Yeah, they are an incredible native plant nursery. They're up in Foothills Park in Palo Alto, up
Page Mill Road.
Page Mill Road.
But they're in the park itself?
Yeah, yeah.
This park is closed, it's only Palo Alto residents, so how do you rent it?
That's right. So, and it's not a retail type nursery. But if you have a project, if you're doing a lot of plants and you have a project.
So Jim, I just wanted to say that at our native plant sale on October 19th at Hidden Villa, we co-host with Actera's Nursery. So if you come to this plant sale, we have plants, you know, our nursery sells plants and Actera sells plants as well. So that's a way for you to be able to purchase plants from both us as well as Actera as a retail customer.
This is Deanna Giuliano on the left. She's working with some of my customers. And that's Peter Neal working with Meredith over there on the right. Those guys are very knowledgeable about not only plants, but the roles they play in the ecosystem. And they helped us a lot in the early stages of our project. Some of our lessons learned, like I said, native plants create native seeds and native insects and attract native wildlife. Water. If you don't have water and you want birds, get water. Audubon Society says you should have adequate protection and cover for birds, you know, close to your water, but try not to get it so close where predators can hide and attack birds on the water. 10 feet, maybe, rule of thumb. And like I said, we don't have a feeder. So here is just a couple of references. There's that Las Pilitas website. Usually when I'm doing plant research, I'll just type the name of the plant into Google search. But usually Las Pilitas is one of the ones that pops up. That's usually my go-to. Xerces Society. That's where I learned most of what I know about native bees and other invertebrates. Gardening with a Wild Heart by Judith Lardner Lowry is a really good book to kind of shift you into a different headspace and thinking about natives. She lives in Bolinas. She has a beautiful native plant nursery at her home in Bolinas. If you ever go to Bolinas, go find it. I was lucky enough, I was there on a Sunday with some friends, and we went to her garden and I got to meet her. The garden wasn't open, but she was there and got to talk to her a little bit.
She sells lots of native seeds, so she has a website. And
Yes.
so you can order, and I have ordered several times and really like the seeds I got.
Yeah, Larner Seed, I think
right.
is the name of it. A little bit.
Mark,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask if Sunset Magazine is really starting to get behind this at all. They're a good source of info.
You know, I think Sunset is they are becoming more native conscious than they used to be. They're not, that's not really their bread and butter, but yeah, I think, they're evolving a little bit. I like Sunset. I know people that work for them and have worked for them, and they do great things. Maybe not your best source for native plant information.
They're just good generally for design ideas, right?
Yeah. California Native Plant Society, very good resource. And that's it for me, folks. Thank you very much. So we've gone